To save his inheritance, Millionaire signed contract wedding, but fell deeply for his fake bride. Before we dive into this amazing love story, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And tell us in the comments which country you're watching from. We love hearing from our global audience. Now let's discover how a cold business contract became the most passionate love story of the year. Alexander Whitmore sat in his penthouse office, staring at the will that would determine his entire future. At 32, he was already a millionaire through his own tech investments, but his grandfather's inheritance would secure his family's legacy forever. The problem was the clause that made his blood run cold. Alexander must be married before his 33rd birthday, or the entire $50 million estate goes to charity. His grandfather had been old-fashioned, believing that a man needed a wife to truly understand responsibility. Alexander had 6 months to find someone willing to marry him, not for love, but for survival. "This is insane," he muttered, loosening his tie in frustration. His assistant knocked and entered. "Mr. Whitmore? There's someone here to see you about the arrangement." Alexander looked up to see a young woman walking into his office. She was 26, with intelligent brown eyes and an air of quiet determination. Her name was Isabella Rodriguez, and she was exactly what he had been looking for. Someone who needed money enough to agree to this bizarre arrangement. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, standing and extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." Isabella shook his hand firmly. Her touch was warm, professional, nothing more. "Mr. Whitmore, I understand you have a proposition that could benefit us both." She had done her research. Isabella was a graduate student drowning in debt, working 3 part-time jobs to support herself while finishing her master's degree in social work. Her father needed expensive medical treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. She was desperate enough to consider anything, even a fake marriage. "Please sit down," Alexander said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. "I'll be direct. I need a wife for 1 year to secure my inheritance. You need money. This would be purely business. Separate bedrooms, no physical relationship, and at the end of 12 months, we get divorced and you walk away with $200,000. Isabella's eyes widened slightly at the amount, but her expression remained composed. "What exactly would this marriage entail?" "Public appearances when necessary. Family dinners. Convincing my relatives that we're genuinely married. Beyond that, you'd have complete freedom to continue your studies and your life." She was quiet for a long moment, considering. Alexander found himself studying her face, noticing the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking deeply. There was something about her that seemed different from the other candidates he had interviewed. "I have conditions," Isabella said finally. "First, I continue my education without interference. Second, no one outside of us knows this is fake. Third, if either of us wants out before the year is up, we discuss it honestly." Alexander nodded. "Agreed. Anything else?" "Just one more thing," Isabella said, meeting his eyes directly. "We treat each other with respect. This might be business, but we're still human beings." Something in her tone made Alexander pause. Most of the other women had been focused entirely on the money. Isabella seemed to care more about maintaining her dignity and his. "Of course," he said, though he wondered why that particular condition mattered to him so much. They spent the next hour working out the details. Isabella would move into his penthouse within the week. They would be married in a small ceremony the following month. To the outside world, it would appear to be a whirlwind romance between a successful businessman and a graduate student he had swept off her feet. As Isabella prepared to leave, she turned back at the door. "Mr. Whitmore? I know this is just business, but thank you. You're helping save my father's life." The gratitude in her voice caught him off guard. Alexander had expected this to be a cold transaction, but Isabella's obvious relief and appreciation made him feel something he hadn't anticipated: protective. After she left, Alexander stood at his office window, looking out at the city below. In 6 months, he would be married to a woman he barely knew. It was the most logical solution to his problem, but something about Isabella Rodriguez made him wonder if he was getting more than he had bargained for. He pushed the thought away. This was business, nothing more. Isabella stood in the marble foyer of Alexander's penthouse, her single suitcase looking pathetically small in the vast space. The apartment was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art on the walls, furniture that probably cost more than she made in a year. It was also cold and impersonal, like a museum rather than a home. "Your room is down this hallway," Alexander said, leading her through the spacious living area. "It has its own bathroom and walk-in closet. You should have everything you need." The guest room was larger than her entire previous apartment. Isabella set down her suitcase and looked around, trying to process that this would be her home for the next 12 months. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This is overwhelming." Alexander paused in the doorway. "If you need anything changed or added, just let me know. I want you to be comfortable here." There was something in his voice that made Isabella look at him more closely. For a moment, his businessman facade slipped, and she saw genuine concern in his eyes. It surprised her. She had expected him to be completely detached about their arrangement. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "I don't need much." Over the next few days, they established a routine. Alexander left early for work and returned late, giving Isabella space to settle in and continue her studies. When they did interact, their conversations were polite but formal. Two strangers sharing space while maintaining careful boundaries. But Isabella began to notice things about Alexander that didn't match her initial impression. He left fresh coffee made for her every morning, even though he drank espresso. When she mentioned studying late, he quietly adjusted the lighting in the living room to be better for reading. Small gestures that suggested he was paying attention to her needs. "You don't have to do these things," Isabella said one evening when she found him setting up a desk area for her in the corner of the living room. "Do what?" Alexander asked, looking genuinely confused. "Take care of me. This is just business, remember?" Alexander stopped what he was doing and looked at her directly. "Maybe it's business, but that doesn't mean I can't be considerate. You're helping me solve a massive problem. The least I can do is make sure you're comfortable." Isabella felt something shift in her chest, a warmth she hadn't expected. Most people wouldn't see it that way. "I'm not most people," Alexander said simply, then seemed to realize how that sounded. I just think we should make this as pleasant as possible for both of us." That night, Isabella lay in her luxurious bed thinking about the man sleeping down the hallway. Alexander Whitmore was nothing like she had expected. The media portrayed him as cold and calculating, but she was beginning to see glimpses of something else. Kindness that he seemed to hide even from himself. A week into their arrangement, Isabella was studying at her new desk when Alexander came home earlier than usual. He looked stressed, his tie loosened and his hair slightly disheveled. "Rough day?" Isabella asked, closing her textbook. Alexander paused as if surprised by the question. "Board meeting didn't go well. Sometimes I wonder if my grandfather was right about needing someone to share the burden with." The admission seemed to slip out before he could stop it. Isabella saw a vulnerability in his eyes that made her heart ache unexpectedly. "Want to talk about it?" she offered. "I'm a pretty good listener." Alexander looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing whether to trust her with something real. "You don't have to pretend to care, Isabella. I know this is just business," she finished. "But that doesn't mean I don't care about your well-being. We're going to be living together for a year, Alexander. We might as well try to be friends." The word friends hung in the air between them, and Isabella realized she meant it. Somewhere in the past week, she had begun to genuinely like the man behind the contract. Alexander sat down across from her, and for the first time since they had met, he looked truly relaxed. "All right," he said. "Let's try being friends." Neither of them realized they were taking the first step towards something much deeper. The ceremony was small and elegant, held in the garden of Alexander's family estate. Only immediate family and a few close friends attended, exactly as they had planned. Isabella wore a simple white dress that Alexander had insisted on buying for her. "For appearances," he had said. But the way he looked at her when she walked down the aisle suggested it was more than that. "You look beautiful," he whispered when she reached him at the altar, and Isabella felt her cheeks warm at the sincerity in his voice. The officiant began the ceremony, and Isabella found herself studying Alexander's face as he repeated the vows. His voice was steady and confident, but she noticed his hands trembling slightly when he slipped the ring onto her finger. The touch of his fingers against hers sent an unexpected thrill through her body. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant announced, and Isabella's heart stopped. They hadn't discussed this moment, hadn't practiced or prepared. As Alexander leaned toward her, Isabella felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. Their lips met in what was supposed to be a brief, ceremonial kiss, but something electric passed between them in that moment. The kiss lasted longer than necessary, and when they separated, both of them looked surprised by the intensity of it. Isabella's lips tingled, and she saw something in Alexander's eyes that hadn't been there before. Desire, quickly masked but unmistakable. The reception was a blur of congratulations and small talk. Isabella played her role perfectly, smiling and accepting well wishes from Alexander's family. His grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, was particularly warm toward her. "I haven't seen Alexander this relaxed in years," Eleanor whispered to Isabella during the father-daughter dance. "Whatever magic you've worked on him, my dear, please keep it up." Isabella glanced at Alexander, who was laughing at something his cousin had said. Eleanor was right. He did seem different tonight. Less guarded, more genuinely happy than she had ever seen him. "It's not magic," Isabella replied. "I think he just needed someone to see him as more than his business success." Eleanor studied Isabella with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You really care about him, don't you? This isn't what I expected when he told me about your whirlwind romance." Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. Was her growing affection for Alexander that obvious? "He's a good man," she said carefully. "Yes, he is. And you're exactly what he needs, whether he realizes it yet or not." Later that evening, back in the penthouse, Isabella and Alexander stood in the living room, still wearing their wedding attire. The formal ceremony was over, but the weight of what they had done hung between them. "That went well," Alexander said, loosening his tie. "My family seems to adore you." "They're wonderful," Isabella replied. "Your grandmother especially. She really loves you." Alexander smiled, and Isabella noticed how the expression transformed his entire face. "She raised me after my parents died. She's the only family that really matters to me." "What happened to your parents?" Isabella asked gently. Alexander was quiet for a moment. "Car accident when I was 15. That's when I went to live with my grandparents. My grandfather taught me everything about business, but my grandmother, she taught me about everything else." The vulnerability in his voice made Isabella want to comfort him. Without thinking, she stepped closer and placed her hand on his arm. "I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult." Alexander looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. For a moment, they stood frozen like that, closer than they had ever been. The air between them charged with possibility. "Isabella," he said softly, and she heard something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. "Yes? Thank you. For today, for everything. I know this isn't real, but it felt real today." Isabella's heart hammered in her chest. "It felt real to me too." They stared at each other, both realizing they were crossing into dangerous territory. This was supposed to be business, nothing more. But the way Alexander was looking at her now had nothing to do with contracts or inheritance. "We should probably get some rest," Isabella said finally. Though she made no move to step away. "Probably," Alexander agreed. But he didn't move either. In the end, it was the sound of his phone ringing that broke the spell. Alexander stepped back, the moment shattered, and Isabella felt the loss of his proximity like a physical ache. As she prepared for bed that night, Isabella caught sight of herself in the mirror. She was still wearing her wedding dress, still wearing Alexander's ring on her finger. For a few hours today, she had felt like a real bride marrying the man she was falling in love with. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was falling in love with her fake husband. 3 months into their marriage, Isabella and Alexander had settled into a comfortable routine that felt increasingly natural. They shared morning coffee, talked about their days over dinner, and gradually the formal politeness between them had evolved into genuine friendship. But Isabella was beginning to realize it was becoming something more than friendship. At least for her. Alexander had started working from home more often, claiming he wanted to spend time getting to know his wife better for public appearances. But Isabella suspected there was more to it than that. She caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. His expression soft and thoughtful. "You don't have to work so hard," Alexander said one evening, finding Isabella surrounded by textbooks and research papers at the dining room table. "You know the money is guaranteed, right? You could take a break from school if you wanted." Isabella looked up from her laptop. "This isn't about the money, Alexander. I want to help people. That's why I'm getting my degree in social work." Alexander sat down across from her, genuinely curious. "Tell me about it. What kind of work do you want to do?" Isabella's face lit up as she talked about her passion for helping families in crisis, working with children in the foster system, making a real difference in people's lives. Alexander listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and showing genuine interest in her dreams. "You're amazing," he said when she finished, and the admiration in his voice was unmistakable. "I've never met anyone who cares about others the way you do." Isabella felt warmth spread through her chest. "What about you? What did you want to be when you were a kid, before you inherited the family business?" Alexander was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to be an architect. I loved the idea of creating beautiful spaces where people could live and work and be happy. Why didn't you pursue it?" "Responsibility," Alexander said simply. "After my parents died, I knew I had to take care of the family legacy. My grandfather needed someone to carry on his work." Isabella heard the wistfulness in his voice and realized that Alexander had given up his dreams to honor his family's expectations. It made her see him in a new light, not just as a successful businessman, but as a man who had sacrificed his own desires for duty. "It's not too late, you know," Isabella said softly. "You could still design buildings. You have the resources to do whatever you want." Alexander looked at her with something that might have been hope. Maybe someday. That night, Isabella found herself thinking about Alexander's abandoned dreams and wondering what other parts of himself he kept hidden behind his business facade. The next morning, Alexander surprised her by announcing they were going out for the day. "Wear something comfortable," he said mysteriously. "We're going exploring." He drove them to a part of the city Isabella had never seen. Older neighborhoods with beautiful historic architecture mixed with modern developments. Alexander parked in front of a stunning Victorian house that was clearly being renovated. "I bought this place a few months ago," he said, leading her up the front steps. "I've been working on restoring it in my spare time." Isabella looked around in amazement. The house was incredible. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, intricate moldings that spoke of craftsmanship from another era. But it was clear that Alexander had been the one doing the restoration work. His vision and skill were evident in every carefully preserved detail. "Alexander, this is incredible," Isabella breathed. "You did all this yourself?" He nodded, looking almost shy about her praise. "I know it's not very practical. I already have the penthouse and this place is way too big for one person. But I couldn't bear to see it torn down for condos." Isabella walked through the rooms, admiring the work he had done and imagining the house full of life and laughter. "It's not too big for a family," she said without thinking, then blushed when she realized what she had implied. Alexander went very still. "Isabella, I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to suggest. I know our situation is temporary." But Alexander was looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What if it wasn't?" he said quietly. What if this wasn't temporary? What if we made it real?" Isabella's heart began racing. "Alexander, we can't just—" "Why not?" He stepped closer to her. "I know this started as a business arrangement, but somewhere along the way, it became more than that. At least for me." Isabella stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you, Isabella. I'm saying that sharing my life with you for the past 3 months has been the happiest I've been since my parents died. I'm saying that when I imagine the future now, you're in it." Isabella felt tears spring to her eyes. "Alexander, I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other. But I also know that I want to spend every day for the rest of my life getting to know you better." Before Isabella could respond, Alexander's phone rang, shattering the moment. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's my lawyer. I should take this." As he stepped away to answer the call, Isabella pressed her hands to her cheeks, trying to process what had just happened. Alexander was in love with her. The fake marriage they had entered into was becoming real, and she wanted it more than she had ever wanted anything in her life. But then she heard Alexander's voice change, becoming sharp with anger. "What do you mean, investigation? Who's questioning the validity of our marriage?" Isabella's blood ran cold as the implications hit her. Alexander's face was grim as he ended the call with his lawyer. Isabella watched him pace across the empty room, his jaw tight with tension and frustration. The romantic moment they had shared just minutes before felt like a distant memory now. "Someone has hired a private investigator to look into our marriage," Alexander said finally. "They're claiming it's fraudulent, trying to prove we got married just for the inheritance." Isabella felt the color drain from her face. But we are married. We had a real ceremony, real witnesses. That's not what they're investigating," Alexander interrupted. "They're looking for evidence that we don't have a real marriage. Separate bedrooms, no history of dating. The timing coinciding perfectly with the inheritance deadline. Looks suspicious." Isabella sank into a chair, the weight of their situation hitting her. "What happens if they can prove it's fake? I lose everything. The inheritance, probably my reputation, possibly criminal charges for fraud." Alexander ran his hands through his hair. "And you could be charged as an accessory." The room fell silent except for the sound of construction work echoing from somewhere nearby. Isabella thought about her father, about the medical bills that were still piling up, about the life she had started to build with Alexander. "Who would do this?" she asked. "My cousin Marcus," Alexander said bitterly. "He's next in line for the inheritance if something happens to me. He never got over the fact that grandfather chose me to run the company instead of him." Isabella remembered Marcus from the wedding, tall, handsome, with a charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He had been friendly enough, but there had been something calculating in the way he watched them together. "What do we do?" Isabella asked. Alexander stopped pacing and looked at her directly. "We make it real. Not just on paper, but in every way that matters. We move into the same bedroom. We act like a couple who's genuinely in love. We create a history that will stand up to scrutiny." Isabella's pulse quickened. "Alexander, are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we give them a marriage that's so convincing, so obviously real, that no one could question it." He sat down across from her, his eyes intense. "I know this isn't what we agreed to originally, but everything has changed now." Isabella thought about his confession just minutes before, that he was falling in love with her. Had that been real, or was it just part of this new strategy? The uncertainty made her chest ache. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" she said carefully. "Share my bedroom? Act like we're genuinely attracted to each other in public? Maybe. Maybe let whatever is growing between us develop naturally." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. "And if what's growing between us isn't real? If it's just proximity and convenience?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city beyond. "Isabella, what I said before the phone rang. I meant every word. This investigation doesn't change how I feel about you. How can you be sure?" Isabella asked. "How do you know it's not just because we're living together playing house?" "Maybe you're just lonely." Alexander turned back to her, and the look in his eyes took her breath away. "Because I've been lonely for 3 years, Isabella. I've dated other women, lived with someone before, had relationships that should have filled the emptiness, but nothing did. Not until you moved into my life and showed me what it felt like to have someone who actually cared about the man behind the money." Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. "Alexander, you asked me about my dreams, Isabella. You noticed when I was stressed and tried to help. You made my penthouse feel like a home just by being in it. Do you think I'm so desperate that I would mistake gratitude for love?" Isabella stood up, her emotions churning. Everything had happened so fast. The contract, the marriage, the growing feelings between them, and now this threat that could destroy everything. "I need some time to think," she said. "I understand," Alexander said, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "But Isabella, the investigator is probably watching us already. Whatever we decide, we need to decide quickly." That evening, Isabella sat alone in her bedroom, their bedroom potentially, trying to sort through her feelings. She had entered this arrangement for money, but somewhere along the way, it had become about so much more. Alexander had become important to her, not as a meal ticket, but as a man she genuinely cared about. But was what she felt real love, or was it just the result of living in close quarters with an attractive, kind man who treated her well? And more importantly, was she brave enough to find out? A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Isabella?" Alexander's voice was gentle. "I'm ordering dinner. Do you want your usual?" Such a simple question, but it reminded her of all the ways Alexander had been paying attention to her preferences, her needs, her life. A man who was just using her for convenience wouldn't know that she preferred Thai food when she was stressed, wouldn't remember that she liked extra lime in her sparkling water. "Yes," she called back. "Thank you." But as she heard his footsteps moving away, Isabella realized she wasn't just answering his question about dinner. She was answering the much bigger question he had asked her earlier. Tomorrow, she would tell him yes to everything. Isabella found Alexander in the kitchen the next morning, making coffee with the focused concentration he brought to everything in his life. He looked up when she entered, and she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He had no idea what her decision would be. "Alexander," she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I want to make this marriage real. Not because of the investigation, not because we have to, but because I want to." The coffee mug in Alexander's hand stopped halfway to his lips. "Isabella, are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm sure," she interrupted, stepping closer to him. "I've been thinking all night and I realized something. What I feel for you isn't just gratitude or proximity or playing house. It's love, Alexander. Real love." Alexander set down his mug and reached for her hands. "You have no idea how much I hoped you would say that." "I was scared," Isabella admitted. "I've never felt this way about anyone before, and the circumstances are so unusual. But then I realized that love is unusual. It doesn't follow rules or timelines or logic." Alexander pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Isabella could feel his heart beating rapidly, matching her own. "I love you too," he whispered against her hair. "I love your passion for helping others, your strength, your kindness. I love the way you made my house feel like a home. I love the way you see me, not just as a businessman or an inheritance, but as a person." Isabella pulled back to look at his face. "So what do we do about the investigation?" Alexander smiled, the first genuinely happy smile she had seen from him since the lawyer's call. "We show them what a real marriage looks like. Over the next few weeks, they transformed their relationship from the inside out." Isabella moved into Alexander's bedroom, and the intimacy of sharing space, sharing a bed, sharing their lives completely was both thrilling and natural. They had been building toward this moment for months without realizing it. The private investigator's surveillance captured them grocery shopping together, Alexander's hand resting protectively on Isabella's back. They were photographed sharing intimate dinners, walking hand in hand through the city, Alexander surprising Isabella with flowers after a particularly difficult exam. But it wasn't a performance. It was real life. The life they were building together. "Look at this," Alexander said one evening, showing Isabella photos the investigator had taken of them. "Even I can see that we're in love." Isabella laughed, studying a picture of them at a coffee shop where Alexander was looking at her like she had hung the moon. "We're not very good at hiding it, are we?" "Why would we want to?" Alexander asked, pulling her close. "I want the whole world to know that I'm crazy about my wife." The word wife sent a thrill through Isabella every time he said it. She was his wife, really, truly his wife now. The investigation concluded 6 weeks later with a report that stated unequivocally that the Whitmore marriage was genuine. Alexander's cousin Marcus was furious, but there was nothing he could do. The inheritance was secure, but more importantly, their love was secure. 1 year after their contract wedding, Alexander surprised Isabella with a second ceremony, a renewal of vows in the garden where they had first married. This time, the words meant everything. "A year ago, I married you to save my inheritance," Alexander said, holding Isabella's hands as they stood before their friends and family. Today I'm marrying you to save my heart, my soul, my future. You turned a business arrangement into the greatest love story of my life. Isabella's vows were equally heartfelt. I thought I was marrying you for money, but I was actually marrying you for love. I just didn't know it yet. You showed me that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as something else entirely. As they kissed to seal their renewed commitment, Isabella thought about the journey that had brought them here. A desperate contract had become a deep partnership. A fake marriage had become real love. And two lonely people had found their home in each other. 6 months later, Isabella graduated with her master's degree, and Alexander surprised her by announcing that he was funding a new non-profit organization for her to run, focused on helping families in crisis. Exactly the work she had always dreamed of doing. But what about your business? Isabella asked. I'm turning more control over to my managers, Alexander said. I want time to focus on what really matters. Our life together, the family we're going to build, maybe even getting back to some of those architectural dreams. Isabella looked around the Victorian house Alexander had restored, which was now their family home. It was filled with warmth and laughter, exactly as she had envisioned that first day he had shown it to her. Speaking of the family we're going to build, Isabella said, taking Alexander's hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. We might want to start preparing a nursery. Alexander's eyes widened with wonder and joy. Really? Really? Isabella confirmed, laughing as Alexander swept her up in his arms and spun her around. Their contract marriage had given them an inheritance, but their real marriage had given them something far more valuable. A love that would last forever, and a future filled with all the dreams they would build together. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey from contract to true love. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We have so many more amazing love stories to share with you. Comment below and tell us, do you believe in love at first sight? Or do you think the best love grows slowly over time? We can't wait to hear your thoughts, and we'll see you in the next story.